Imagine walking into a room filled with men whose eyes gleam not with curiosity, but with obsession. The air is thick with tension, the faint scent of tobacco mixing with fear, anticipation, and something else. Something unspoken. It's 1837, New Orleans, and the city is alive with secrets, hidden deals. Silent hierarchies, whispers of power that control lives without mercy. On the surface, it's just another auction. But tonight, something unprecedented will unfold. Something that will ripple through history in ways no one could have imagined. Among the countless bodies lined up, one figure stands apart, not by stature or strength, but by the impossible perfection of her presence. She is Leonina Reynolds, soon to be whispered as the Pearl, a name that will haunt the cobblestones and riverbanks for decades. Her skin glows like cream kissed by coffee, her hair cascading like midnight. Her eyes amber flames that seem to shift when caught in the flicker of gaslight. When the auctioneer calls her lot number 17, the room falls into a silence so profound it feels unnatural, as though the air itself is holding its breath. Every man present feels it, an unspoken recognition that this is not ordinary. Something about her is forbidden, dangerous. And the knowledge that she exists here now is a secret they were never meant to witness. The bidding begins. At first, a polite negotiation, then escalating to sums that could buy entire plantations. Men lean forward, hearts racing, as if they are touching something sacred or profane. Whispers ripple through the crowd. Who is she really? Where did she come from? And why do the powerful families of New Orleans act as though she is more than just a commodity? It isn't just money at stake, it's legacy, bloodlines, control over knowledge that should remain hidden. Every offer, every note passed, every glance shared is a thread in a web that will bind lives, fortunes, and destinies. Tonight marks the beginning of a story that will intertwine obsession, inheritance, deception, and vanishing. Leonina's beauty is not merely skin deep, it is a symbol of influence, a trigger that exposes the corruption, the greed, and the psychological machinery operating beneath polite society. And as you watch this, remember, the truth you are about to uncover was never meant for your eyes. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some secrets once spoken can never be unheard. 3 weeks before the fateful auction, a ship named Augusta cuts through the foggy waters of the Mississippi, carrying not cargo but a passenger, Leonina Reynolds. Official records list her simply as a companion to a merchant named Marcus Bennett, who by the time the vessel docked was already dead, claimed by a fever contracted in Havana. No papers, no lineage, no proof of freedom. The authorities, unaware of her ancestry or her true value, seize her and consign her to the auction block. But this is only what the public would ever see. What is hidden beneath the surface is far more unsettling. Leonina was not born into bondage. Her mind, her grace, her very existence had been carefully cultivated, nurtured and suppressed in ways designed to place her exactly where she was meant to be. Powerful men, whispering names in shadowed rooms, had tracked her arrival, aware of her bloodline, aware of her potential leverage. She was not merely a woman to be sold, she was a key. A key to fortunes, to secrets, to doors that were never meant to open. Every glance from the auction crowd hinted at the recognition of something that transcended wealth, a knowledge of her connection to families, wielded influence like a blade over the city. The Augusta's passenger manifest tells a sanitized story, but journals, private correspondences, and the obscure records later uncovered reveal a far darker truth. Leonina's life had been manipulated from birth. Her mother's death, the mysterious death of her father at sea, the whispers of the Villers family bloodline, they were all part of a system designed to hide her identity, to control her destiny, to place her precisely at the intersection of power, property, and secrecy. By the time she stepped onto New Orleans soil, she had become both vulnerable and immensely valuable, an unwitting pawn in games that stretched beyond her comprehension. The bidding that night at St. Louis Hotel was more than financial, it was symbolic. Each increase in offer was a silent acknowledgement of her potential. Men in the room were aware, even subconsciously, that owning Elelenina meant possessing influence, knowledge, and leverage they themselves might never fully understand. Behind polite smiles and polished manners, the machinery of manipulation was in motion. Some bidders were driven by lust, others by curiosity. But the true power brokers understood that she represented something far more dangerous. The possibility of a secret unraveling, an inheritance disputed, a truth long suppressed, threatening to emerge. And as the gavel fell, and Charles de Loqua claimed her at an unprecedented sum, the room exhaled collectively. But Elelenina's story was far from simple ownership. She had entered a labyrinth, a world governed by psychological control systems, by elite agendas, and by histories buried beneath layers of wealth and influence. Her confinement in the Delacroix mansion was not merely physical, it was orchestrated to contain knowledge, to monitor behavior, to prevent discovery. Every interaction she had, every word spoken or withheld, was a calculated part of a deeper plan she did not yet understand. The first threads of a web were being drawn tight around her, threads that would ensnare more than just her body, they would challenge her mind, her will, and the very essence of her identity. And now, whispers the voice of history, speaking through the centuries, you are witnessing the mechanism of control as it was designed to operate, hidden in plain sight. Watch closely because every truth you encounter here is a tool, a warning and a mirror reflecting the forces that move unseen through society and perhaps even through your own life. The Delacroix mansion on Royal Street was not merely a house, it was a fortress of secrets. It's a theater of silent power, and a labyrinth designed to control more than just the bodies within its walls. Elelenina Reynolds arrived there under the guise of a ward. Not a slave, yet every detail of her existence was dictated by unseen forces. Her rooms were elegant, her meals refined, her clothes befitting a lady of society, but the freedom she appeared to enjoy was an illusion. Every window barred subtly, every visitor screened, every servant carefully positioned to report, not serve. She was surrounded by wealth, yet imprisoned by design. At first, the arrangement seemed almost benign. The mansion's halls echoed with polite conversation and the faint strains of music. Yet beneath the polished veneer, the machinery of psychological control was operating with precision. Delacroix himself monitored her interactions, her movements, her questions, ensuring she remained compliant. In his eyes, she was not a person, but a variable, an unknown factor whose potential to disrupt the carefully ordered hierarchy had to be contained. Every word spoken to her was measured, every gesture observed, every step catalogued. It was not cruelty born of malice, but of calculation. She was a living ledger of secrets, and every secret she might uncover posed a threat. Elelenina's education, her grace, her curiosity, all the qualities that made her extraordinary, were now weapons against her. The mansion was structured to isolate her, to prevent alliances, to suppress knowledge she might use to reclaim her identity. Guests were allowed in, but only those who would reinforce the illusion of security. Outsiders who might help were subtly blocked, delayed, or monitored. She began to understand, slowly and painfully, that her confinement was not about labor, it was about control, about the invisible threads tying her to the interests of powerful men whose motives she could barely fathom. Within the walls of the mansion, she began to see the signs, whispered French phrases from Delacroix's visitors, hints about bloodlines, glances that lingered too long, and conversations paused abruptly when she entered a room. Each moment revealed that her beauty, her presence, was not incidental. It was a signal, a key to hidden fortunes, and an object of obsession. Men and women alike treated her as both a prize and a puzzle. She learned to navigate the halls with caution, to speak sparingly, to observe relentlessly. Every small act of curiosity became dangerous. Every misstep could reveal knowledge she was not meant to possess. And yet, even in confinement, her mind began to awaken to the mechanics of power. She saw the mansion for what it was, a carefully orchestrated cage, designed to teach obedience, to instill dependence, and to enforce silence. But with awareness came defiance. Elalanina realized that the very control meant to suppress her could be reversed if she could decode the intentions behind each action. Silence, each rule. And so she began to watch, to memorize, to understand. The mansion itself became a teacher, a trap, and a mirror reflecting the intricate machinery of wealth, influence, and fear. And as you listen to this, remember, what she discovered here is not just history, it is a template of control that echoes across centuries, waiting to be recognized, understood, and confronted. Winter had settled over New Orleans, and the Delacroix mansion, despite its elegance, felt colder than the river mist outside. Elanina Reynolds moved through its halls with growing awareness, noting every footstep, every shadow, every whisper. She began to notice visitors who arrived unannounced, their eyes sharp, their questions precise, and their intentions masked beneath courteous smiles. Each man or woman carried with them a weight of authority, and every interaction seemed designed to test her, to measure her understanding, and to remind her that she was both a prize and a puzzle in a game far larger than herself. It was during one such visit that she first glimpsed the invisible forces shaping her life. An elderly man, his presence both commanding and unsettling, arrived without warning. He spoke in French, believing she could not comprehend, and yet every word felt like it was aimed directly at her consciousness. He discussed names, family connections, and inheritances in hushed tones, hinting at bloodlines and histories that seemed almost mythic in their reach. Elanina realized, with a jolt of fear and fascination, that her existence was not merely incidental, it was the result of careful planning, woven into the strategies of powerful families who had eyes on her before she had even drawn breath. Her confinement, once seen as mere containment, now revealed itself as a calculated observation. She was being watched, assessed, and judged. Not for her actions, but for the potential of her ancestry, her knowledge, and her ability to disrupt the careful balance of power. Every servant, every attendant, even the staff she trusted, had their roles in this silent hierarchy. Some were loyal, some coerced, and some, she realized with dawning horror, were spies. Her own movements and conversations were threads, being mapped into a ledger of control that she was only beginning to understand. Yet, within this pressure, Elalanina's mind sharpened. She began to decode the patterns, the pauses in conversations, the glances that lingered too long, the subtle mentions of documents, gold lockets, ships, and names. Each clue hinted at a network of secrets, a suppressed history meant to remain buried. It became clear that certain men were desperate to maintain illusions of wealth, of lineage, social order, while others were quietly testing her capacity to comprehend these hidden truths. And somewhere in all of this, her identity, her rightful inheritance, and perhaps her freedom were at stake. It is here in the silent tension between obedience and awareness that Elalena began to feel the first stirrings of agency. She realized that knowledge itself was power, that awareness of the hidden rules and unseen watchers could shift the balance in ways the observers had not anticipated. And as you listen to this story, recognize that these patterns are not relics, they are timeless. The structures of control, surveillance, and manipulation remain, merely changing form. What Elalena learned under the guise of obedience? You too can begin to perceive that history is not just a record of events, but a map of influence, secrets, and strategies hidden in plain sight, waiting for the mind sharp enough to see. By the spring of that year, Elanina Reynolds had begun to understand the full weight of her confinement. The mansion, with its ornate walls and gilded windows, was no longer a home, it was a cage. But cages, she realized, could be navigated. Every servant she observed, every footstep she recorded, every whispered phrase she overheard became part of a growing mental map. She began to identify the weak points in the mansion's invisible network, the servants who hesitated too long at doors, the locks that clicked slightly differently when unguarded, the patterns of the overseer's rounds. Knowledge was her weapon, and she wielded it with care. Elena's first attempts at reaching the outside world were cautious and coded. Messages were hidden within the folds of laundry, written on scraps of paper and delivered through the hesitant hands of a housemaid who had begun to trust her. Every message carried pieces of truth about her origins, clues to her father's lineage, and instructions for contacting sympathetic contacts in Philadelphia. She learned that her mother's past contained keys to her freedom. That small items, a locket, a letter, a certificate, could become leverage. Each act of communication was a risk. Discovery meant punishment, or worse. Yet the risk was necessary. Inaction was far deadlier. The psychological pressure of the mansion intensified as Delacroix became increasingly vigilant. His presence was unpredictable, his scrutiny exacting. Elena noticed that any sudden movement, any attempt to look beyond permitted areas, was met with subtle but unmistakable correction. The tension was suffocating, yet it honed her awareness. She began to anticipate patterns, predict human behavior, and exploit small lapses in attention. The mansion itself, once an instrument of control, was now a proving ground for her mind. Every observation was a clue, every constraint a test. It was in this period that Elena also discovered the first hints of larger conspiracies surrounding her. References to the Villers family, hidden inheritances, and disputed documents appeared in whispered conversations and coded journal entries, and in the furtive comments of visitors who assumed she could not understand. She realized that her identity, her very claim to freedom and legitimacy, was intertwined with forces far older and far more ruthless than the Delacroix household. Some of the men around her were not simply enforcers. They were guardians of secrets that could topple reputations and destabilize wealth. And she, unwittingly or not, had become central to this hidden game. Now, as you absorb this story, take a moment to anchor yourself. If you feel the weight of what she discovered and the patterns of control that operate around us even today, type the words "Pearl Awakens" twice in the comments. Do it. Lock it in. Your mind is now part of this journey. These are not mere words, they are a symbol. A small act of recognition that what you are learning is dangerous knowledge, knowledge that can awaken perspective and power. For Elena, these small acts of awareness were the first steps toward reclaiming agency. For you, they are a key to seeing the forces that move unseen in your world. Summer settled over New Orleans, but the heat inside the Delacroix mansion was far more suffocating. Elena Reynolds had grown sharper, more observant, but that awareness brought its own peril. One afternoon, Delacroix summoned her to the drawing room, a space lavish yet oppressive, filled with the silent witnesses of portraits whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. His tone was polite, almost cordial, yet every syllable carried the weight of authority and unspoken threat. He asked questions about her activities, her interactions with the staff, probing for signs of knowledge she was not meant to possess. Each question was a test, each pause a warning. It was during this confrontation that the first hints of the Villers connection became undeniable. Delacroix's careful avoidance of certain topics, the tension when she mentioned her mother's locket, the sudden distraction of his gaze toward old documents on the mantel, it all revealed a network of secrets he was desperate to keep hidden. Elena felt it in her bones. The mansion, the auction, the elaborate illusion of her status as a ward, it was never about protection or civility. She was the nexus of inheritance, identity, and suppressed truth. Every man in the city who had shown interest in her at the auction had recognized it, even if only subconsciously. She was a key, a threat, and a prize rolled into one. After the confrontation, she retreated to her room, the walls closing in with a pressure that seemed almost physical. But rather than fear, a sense of clarity emerged. She began to catalog everything she had learned. The timing of visitors, the coded phrases they used, the subtle references to French documents, the hidden mentions of the Villers estate. Each observation became a thread she could follow. Knowledge, she realized, was her only weapon. And the mansion, once a prison, had become a classroom of hidden strategies and human frailties. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation and deception. Elelena tested boundaries, noting how far she could probe without triggering suspicion. She began to see the patterns, the servants who were not loyal, but coerced. The visitors who carried authority, masked as courtesy. The legal and social structures that insulated the powerful from accountability. Each insight revealed a psychological map of control, system designed to manipulate obedience, maintain hierarchy, and erase inconvenient truths. And at the center of it all was her, a young woman whose rightful freedom, inheritance could unravel decades of carefully constructed authority. By midsummer, her understanding had deepened into strategy. She observed Aloqua's moods, predicted the timing of visits, and even learned which staff members could be persuaded to act as silent allies. And through it all, the whispers of the Villers bloodline became clearer: a secret inheritance, forbidden identity, a truth that powerful men were willing to kill to suppress. The mansion's gilded cage had revealed its purpose, to contain not just her body, but her knowledge, her lineage, and her potential. And as you hear this, understand that the forces shaping her reality are echoes of those that operate in every society, behind every institution, and often unnoticed in your own life. To see them, to recognize them, is the first step toward mastery of your own domain. By late summer, Elelani Reynolds had transformed. No longer merely a pawn, she had become an observer, a strategist, a mind quietly bending the mansion's invisible rules to her will. She had identified the few she could trust, or at least manipulate. A housemaid hesitant but loyal. A groundskeeper who feared the consequences but longed for justice. And a private secretary whose eyes betrayed knowledge he pretended to withhold. Each became a thread in her intricate web, a network she spun quietly within the gilded cage of the Delacroix mansion. Plans began to form, small at first, deliberate, testing limits and reactions. Messages were passed with precision, folded in linens, whispered under doors, carried in coded gestures. She learned when the doors were unlocked, when the guard's attention faltered, and when visitors arrived in patterns that allowed small movements unseen. Every observation, every test, every calculated delay was a rehearsal for a future she intended to seize. Her freedom, her rightful inheritance, and the truth of her bloodline depended on it. Each step brought risk, but risk had become a companion, a fuel for her resolve. But the mansion's walls did not contain the dangers alone. Beyond them, the world itself was a trap. Rumors of her lineage, scattered hints of her mother's past, and whispered mentions of the Villers' inheritance had reached ears eager to suppress the truth. Powerful men were mobilizing, subtle yet insistent, to ensure that she remained trapped, not just physically, but in perception and legality. Every footstep she considered taking outside the mansion was a potential signal to those who watched, a risk that could undo months of careful planning. Despite the stakes, she pressed forward. The housemaid agreed to deliver messages to trusted contacts in Philadelphia, messages hidden in mundane tasks and coded within innocuous phrases. Supplies were prepared discreetly, clothing that could disguise her, letters of introduction concealed in everyday items, small tokens of her mother's past that might confirm her identity. Every action was measured, every ally vetted, every plan rehearsed. She was learning the art of psychological warfare, how to anticipate the moves of her captors, how to bend the environment to her advantage, and how to weaponize knowledge against those who underestimated her. And yet, for all her preparation, the mansion remained a pressure cooker of observation. Delacroix's scrutiny never slackened. Visitors arrived unexpectedly. Conversations paused abruptly. And servants' loyalties were tested in ways Elelana could only anticipate, never control fully. It was a delicate game of perception and influence, where one misstep could result in punishment or betrayal. But she understood something critical. Danger is always present, and it is not eliminated by hiding. It is navigated, anticipated, and mastered. And as you hear this, consider your own world, the forces that move unseen, the observers who measure your actions, and the subtle manipulations that shape your reality. Awareness is the first act of freedom, and strategy is its companion. She was learning both. September had come, and the air of the Delacqua mansion had grown thick with anticipation, though only Elena Reynolds seemed aware of it. Months of observation, calculation, and silent testing had prepared her for this moment. The first attempt to reclaim her freedom would not be bold. It would be precise, like the slow turning of a lock hidden behind polished walls. Every step she took, every breath she drew, was measured against the unseen watchers who sought to suppress her, to erase her existence, to render her nothing more than a pawn. The night was moonless, shadows swallowing the edges of the mansion's gardens. Elena moved quietly through the corridors, noting the positions of servants, the rhythm of Delacqua's patrols, the soft creak of floorboards that could betray her presence. She carried with her small tokens of her mother's past, letters hidden in folds of clothing, and a single locket that was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of her identity, a key to a legacy that men had fought to hide. Each step into the night was a step toward reclaiming what had been stolen from her. But each step also carried the ever-present weight of exposure and danger. Her movements were nearly flawless, but the mansion, like a living organism, responded to intrusions. A servant, previously considered loyal, hesitated at the staircase, their shadow stretching unnaturally in the dim candlelight. A visitor, unexpected and silent, appeared at the threshold, eyes piercing through the darkness. Elena froze, heart pounding, mind racing. She realized in that moment that control was not only external, it was psychological. Delacqua's influence extended through anticipation, fear, and suggestion, shaping behavior before action could even occur. Every trap, every watcher, every unseen hand was part of a system designed to suppress initiative, to enforce obedience, to erase agency. And yet, in that tense stillness, she discovered a critical truth. The most potent chains are not physical. They are in expectation, in manipulation, in the belief that resistance is futile. She navigated the mansion's shadows, aware that every movement could reveal her intentions, that every whisper could be weaponized against her. She adjusted, adapted, and continued learning, testing, and preparing for the moment when opportunity would align perfectly with courage. Her mind had become sharper than any lock, more precise than any guard, more vigilant than the systems designed to suppress her. As you listen, reflect. Control operates not only through walls, doors, or chains. It is psychological, invisible, and pervasive. And the awareness of its mechanisms, recognizing the watchers, decoding the patterns, understanding the leverage is the first step to liberation. Elena's journey is a guide, a warning, and a blueprint. Every step she took in that night of shadows was a rehearsal for freedom. And in her story lies a truth that transcends history. Awareness is power, and knowledge is the key. Remember the symbol, Pearl Awakens. Let it anchor your attention, for the descent is far from over, and the forces at play are relentless. The night of her first escape attempt ended not in freedom, but in revelation. Elena Reynolds had slipped past the mansion's eyes, navigated shadows and silence, and felt the rush of agency, a taste of what could be hers. Yet the mansion was patient, observant, and merciless. By dawn, subtle alarms had been raised. A misplaced object, a shadow in a hallway, a servant's uneasy glance. Delacqua did not need to confront her directly. The architecture of control and the network of watchers ensured that the consequences arrived before she even realized the danger. She was returned to her quarters under the guise of casual oversight, yet the tension was palpable. Conversations shifted, glances sharpened, and the air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken warning. Elena understood in the deepest sense that her freedom would never be granted. It could only be claimed, stolen, or fought for through cunning and awareness. Every detail of her environment was now a teacher, which servants could be relied upon, which visitors were harmless observers, and which forces moved with a calculated ruthlessness meant to contain not just her body, but her very mind. It was. During these tense days, that new pieces of the Villers puzzle emerged. The elderly man who had previously visited returned, alone. Carrying the weight of decades and secrets too dangerous to speak aloud, he questioned her not about the mansion, but about her mother, about gold lockets, letters, and faint traces of lineage that pointed to the Villers family. The insinuations were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet the implications were explosive. She was not merely a ward or a pawn, but a living claim to a fortune, a bloodline, and a legacy that powerful men had sought to erase. The realization was overwhelming. Her beauty, her presence, her intelligence all had been factors in a system designed to suppress her inheritance, to bend her will, to erase her from history. Elenina's partial escape had exposed more than the weaknesses of the mansion. It had illuminated the depth of the conspiracy surrounding her. She now understood that her every movement, every attempt at autonomy, was observed and interpreted through the lens of fear, greed, and legacy. Her mother's past, her father's hidden lineage, the documents and tokens she carried, all were not just personal artifacts, but weapons in a hidden war waged by men who feared exposure, scandal, and loss of power. And it became clear, to survive, she would need more than courage. She would need strategy, patience, and the willingness to confront danger directly. As you listen, reflect on the patterns that stretch beyond history. Power often hides behind facades of civility.
S.
Control operates through observation, anticipation, and subtle manipulation. Elenina's partial success is instructive. Freedom is not merely an act, it is a comprehension of systems, mastery of perception, and a readiness to exploit hidden opportunities. The mansion, the watchers, the hidden interests, they are mirrors for forces that exist today. Awareness, vigilance, and strategy are the only weapons. And if you feel the weight of these lessons, type again, this time in your mind, or aloud the phrase, "Pearl awakens." Anchor yourself. Because the descent is nearly complete, and the final revelations will challenge everything you thought you knew about power, history, and human ambition. By the winter of 1842, Ileana Reynolds had vanished from the Delacroix mansion in the eyes of New Orleans society, but her presence was far from erased. Every whisper, every glance, every rumor hinted at a force she had quietly mastered. The ability to claim her identity, her lineage, and her freedom in a world designed to deny both. Her reappearance at the St. Louis Hotel during the Mardi Gras ball, a moment as calculated as it was breathtaking, was not simply a social triumph. It was a declaration. The system that had sought to contain her could not dictate her destiny. She walked into the ballroom, adorned in midnight blue silk, every step deliberate, every movement a command. The eyes of the elite, men who had once bid on her as property, now followed with awe, confusion, and suppressed fear. Delacroix, present in the crowd, was forced to witness the manifestation of what he had tried to suppress: a mind, a presence, a history that could not be contained. And behind her, quietly, the truth of the Villers bloodline traveled with her, the documents. The letters, the proof that had been hidden for decades now, gave her leverage beyond imagination. She was no longer a pawn, she was the player. The mansion that had once suffocated her was now a memory, a lesson in control, observation, and human psychology. Every shadow, every watcher, every subtle manipulation had prepared her for this moment. And as she stepped onto the floor, the audience unaware of the depths of her knowledge, the conspiracies she had unraveled, the dangers she had survived, experienced only the surface: beauty, poise, and grace. But beneath it all, Elenina wielded power, hidden knowledge, and the quiet satisfaction of justice, deferred but ultimately realized. And yet the story does not end in comfort or resolution. 2 weeks later, records show that the Delacroix family vanished without warning, leaving behind a mansion filled with secrets, portraits, and the traces of a struggle they had failed to control. Investigations revealed the bodies of their closest aides, executed in a manner both precise and terrifying. The mansion, once a symbol of their power, had become a monument to their failure. Ada Lana Nina Reynolds, having claimed what was rightfully hers, disappeared again, this time into history itself, leaving behind only fragments of a life that challenged the boundaries of control, inheritance, and human ambition. As you hear this, understand the lesson hidden in shadows and whispers. Control is never absolute, power is always conditional, and knowledge dangerous. Forbidden knowledge is the ultimate weapon. Nina's journey is a mirror. It reflects not only a hidden past, but the subtle forces at work in every society, every institution, and often within ourselves. Awareness is freedom. Strategy is survival. And the courage to seek truth, even in the face of forces that would erase you, is the act that separates the enslaved from the liberated. Remember the phrase one last time? Pearl awakens. Let it echo in your mind as a symbol of vigilance, mastery, and the dangerous transformative power of forbidden knowledge.